I didn't mean to keep it a secret. I just forgot to tell my manager the cameras were back on. For 6 weeks, our floor looked like a construction site cosplaying as a marketing agency. Ceiling tiles stacked in the print room, drop cloths draped over framed awards, cables coiled like sleeping snakes along the corridor. The old DVR in the IT closet had died mid-renovation, and facilities decided, with a shrug, that we could live without eyes until the cabling subcontractor finished. Everyone adjusted. Cleaners left the lights brighter at night. The prototype cabinet got an extra padlock. Ethan, my manager, stopped pretending to whisper when he chewed someone out after hours. Friday evening, the new PoE cameras came online while the painters were still debating eggshell versus satin. I spent an hour labeling the streams: reception dome, north hallway, break room, server corridor, then pointed the NVR to our cloud bucket and set motion rules. I drafted an email to the team, FYI, security cameras re-enabled, audit logs retained, and saved it to drafts, because my train was in 4 minutes and my brain was already halfway home. It was the kind of grown-up task you finish Monday with coffee in hand. Monday didn't wait for coffee. At 8:11 a.m., my phone vibrated with a storage anomaly alert. Overnight data spike. 12.4 GB pushed to cloud between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. That didn't make sense. Weekends generate dust and photocopiers sign in their sleep, not double-digit gigs. I told myself it was the installers running tests, and opened the web client to clear the flags. If you've ever looked at a timeline full of gray and seen a sliver of red you can't unsee, you know the feeling that walked its cold fingers up my spine. Motion markers. 213, 219, 307, 329. Multiple angles. I clicked the first one, reception dome, 213. The lobby looked like it always does when no one is supposed to be there. Echoey, too clean. A ficus leaning under its own optimism. Then the elevator doors parted. A man in a baseball cap stepped out, head down, the brim low enough to turn his face into a guessing game. He moved like a person who'd measured these steps in his head. He didn't try the lights. He knew exactly where the exit signs bled, just enough red to walk by. He paused under the camera for a fraction, like a swimmer testing water, and then crossed right out of frame toward the glass doors that lead deeper into the suite. I scrubbed forward to the north hallway camera. There he was again, the same cap, this time in profile, long enough to show a mouth I recognized, even set in a thin line. Ethan's mouth. I'd stared at it countless times across the conference table as it flattened during other people's updates. My pulse thudded behind my ears. Ethan didn't even glance up at the corner mount. He had on nitrile gloves, sky blue tight at the wrist, and he pulled a small rectangle from his pocket that flashed a faint green when it kissed the reader at the prototype room. The lock gave its polite, obedient click. I didn't hit pause. I didn't breathe. The camera in the server corridor warmed into color at 2:19. Grainy, yes, but the perspective our consultants always call compelling. Fluorescent flicker, a line of cold gray rack faces, and Ethan framed by both, shoulders rounding as he pushed the door with his elbow, like a man who's done elbows before. He looked larger this way, alone, away from his glass-walled office and the performative swagger that filled it. All efficiency now. He closed the door with his heel and stood for a beat, as if listening for something only he knew to expect. Maybe he's checking for flood sensors, my brain offered kindly. Maybe he's here to save us from a leak. My brain lies when it wants to protect me. He passed the racks, not toward the network shelf where the installers left the new recorder humming, but toward the old shelf with the dead DVR, a black rectangle unplugged and unblinking. He tugged at cables that weren't plugged in, then smiled, actually smiled, and popped the useless drive tray like he'd just shut down the Death Star. I watched his shoulders loosen as a person loosens when they believe a problem is solved. The new recorder's status light pulsed from the other wall, the soft heartbeat blink of a device doing exactly what it was paid to do. If he heard it, he didn't show it. He turned instead to the wall cabinet where we keep spare peripherals and pulled out a zip bag of labeled USB sticks. He sorted with a strange care, thumb, index, thumb, until he found one with a printed label that made my stomach flip. Client export 4. He held it, considered, and slid it into his jacket. I should have stood up. I should have walked down the hall and said something banal like, "Forgot something?" Instead, I kept watching because now the footage wasn't about lights and hallways. It was about intent. He went to the prototype room again. The fisheye angle turned the room into a snow globe of desks and boxes, and there was Ethan, moving through it like he'd choreographed the dance in an empty kitchen. He knelt by the lock cabinet, took a flat packet from his pocket, something metallic, flexible, and slipped it between the doors. The padlock didn't rattle. The doors sighed. Inside, there were 2 white boxes the size of shoe boxes, with our client's name heat embossed in silver. He didn't hesitate. He slid both into a backpack he must have left in there earlier, because it didn't appear until he needed it. The nitrile gloves flashed blue as he zipped. At 3:07 a.m., the hallway camera picked up a staccato beep that the software transcribed as badge event. Even without the transcript, I know the tone pattern of our readers, like I know the sound of my own microwave. MasterCard beep, high, low, long. Clone attempts, 2 sharp chirps, a petulant error the reader spits out when something is almost right. The clone worked on the second try. He rested his palm on the reader afterward, a weird, tender gesture like he was reassuring it. Shh, that didn't happen. The printer in accounting kicked awake at 3:29, a paper ghost spitting a single page into the tray. The hallway cam caught only the corner of the sheet, but I saw the header, incident report, before he folded it with unbelonging neatness and slid it into a manila folder. He set that folder on my chair on his way back, because the next clip, North Hallway 331, briefly shows my name tag catching the red exit glow as he passes my cubicle and places the folder just so. His hand hovered over my desk drawer like a priest blessing bread. He opened it, and though the camera couldn't see inside, it didn't need to. He was planting something. He checked his watch twice while he did it. The elevator camera gave me a gift I didn't deserve, a mirrored panel that turned its little world into a 4-angle set. Ethan stepped in alone, backpack set right between his shoes, and stared at his reflection. He widened his eyes, then narrowed them. He practiced surprise the way you practice a foreign word you don't own yet. He rubbed his jaw as if deciding where contrition sits best on a face. My cursor hovered over the seek bar without moving. Everything in me wanted this to be a glitch, a prank, a series of coincidences that would make sense if you stepped 1 inch back from the screen. But logic kept folding itself smaller. He knew the camera positions. He assumed the DVR was the system. He came prepared with gloves. He borrowed our own labels to make theft look like archiving. I felt the kind of cold that starts in your molars. I realized my hand was pressed flat to my sternum, like I was trying to keep something in. Most people think IT is a job about fixing things after they break. The secret is, you spend more time preventing breakage in human behavior than in metal. You build guardrails people can't see and hope they forgive you when they bump one. And then you watch a guardrail work in real time and you don't know whether to be proud or sick. I rewound to 2:13 and watched again, slower, forcing myself to notice the ordinary around the wrongness. The tape line the painters forgot to peel, the twist tie on the ficus steak, the way the night shift cleaner had folded the lobby rug corner perfectly square. I noticed something else then, something that later I wouldn't stop thinking about. When Ethan first stepped under the reception dome, he looked up. Not a full look, just one of those automatic glances people throw at ceilings as they pass under a sprinkler or a vent. The cap brim caught the lens for a fraction, and in that fraction the camera's red record LED reflected as a pinprick in his pupil. A single, impossible star. My cursor finally moved. I exported the clips and hashed them into a packet, my fingers performing the muscle memory of preservation while my brain ran contingency scenarios, like a fire drill with no exit doors marked. If I went to Ethan first, he'd devour me and swallow the bones. If I went loud, he'd nuke whatever he could reach before anyone got a word in. I stood up because I had to do something, and when I did, I saw the manila folder on my chair, as if it had grown there in the 30 minutes I'd been sitting. Incident report, the typed header, crisp as a sentence carved into a bench. In the hallway, voices rose and fell like they always do on Monday at 9. A client call, the clink of mugs, an intern laughing too brightly at a joke, the copier warming its throat. The ordinary seemed obscene. I slid the folder into my backpack, locked my screen, and walked to the one place in the building where people still believe in chain of custody because it's their whole job to believe in it. Building security sits behind a glass window, the color of old water, 2 floors down from us, where the cameras all converge into a wall of flickering boxes. The guard on duty was a broad-shouldered man with a crossword, a radio, and the patience of a lighthouse. His name tag said R. Soto. "Morning," he said, and his eyes flicked to my pass as if it might be a different person wearing my name today. "Do you have 5 minutes for a question about weekend access logs?" I asked, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone who needed to sit down. "For you," he said, and slid a clipboard toward me. "I've got 6. I placed my laptop on the counter and angled the screen away from the lobby. He watched a second too long, took in the gloves, the backpack, the green LED, and didn't ask any of the questions that would make the moment louder than it already was. He reached under the desk and pulled out a narrow binder with plastic sleeves stuffed with forms I'd never wanted to be on the other side of. "Before we look," he said quietly, "do you want to tell me why you didn't email your manager that the system went live Friday?" Because I forgot. Because I wanted to and didn't. Because part of me hated the way he would take credit for a basic caution. All the answers crowded my tongue, and none of them made a difference now. I swallowed and said, "Because I thought Monday was soon enough." Soto nodded, neither agreeing nor judging, then turned to the console and pulled up the building's badge audit. "All right," he said. "Let's see who thought it wasn't." He'd disabled the wrong thing. When you work in IT, you learn to see patterns. The difference between silence and sabotage. What Ethan did in the footage wasn't random. It was rehearsed. Every motion had intention, right down to how he wiped his fingerprints off the badge reader with his sleeve. He thought he'd disabled the cameras when he yanked the power from the old DVR. He didn't know that 2 days before, I'd rerouted every feed to a new PoE switch, a silent, self-powered network node the size of a paperback book that tucked neatly behind the rack. He'd unplugged a corpse and walked away, feeling victorious. I replayed the footage 3 more times, this time looking for shadows, reflections, anything that would prove my eyes wrong. But there it was, the flash of green from a cloned card, the blue gloves, the smirk. I knew Ethan, the shallow charm, the predatory confidence, the kind of manager who measured authority in decibels, the kind who made interns cry and then asked HR why they were so sensitive. For months he'd been circling me like a shark, waiting for something to weaponize, a missed patch note, an unlogged drive, anything that could be twisted into negligence. I'd given him nothing, until now. I'd just handed him my head on a silver platter, an unannounced surveillance system. The footage didn't just show him stealing. It showed him setting a scene. At 3:07 a.m., he entered my cubicle. The camera above the hallway door caught his reflection on the glossy black of my second monitor, faint but clear enough to see him open my top drawer. His gloved hand reached in and left something there. Then he took out his phone and snapped a photo. Flash on. The bright pulse burned through the image like a confession. He closed the drawer, took another photo of my chair, and carefully placed the incident report folder on top. The timestamp in the corner read 03:09:22. The next clip was worse. Accounting printer feed 3:29 a.m. A page curls into the tray. The footage caught only a sliver of it before Ethan's hand reached in to grab it. The header said, "Statement of Discovery, Unauthorized Data, Export." My name bolded below. The content wasn't fully visible, but I caught enough lines to piece together his story. Employees suspected of transferring client data to external storage. Failure to log security changes requires immediate investigation. He wasn't just stealing, he was building a paper trail to bury me. I scrolled through the footage timeline and found a new anomaly at 3:42. Ethan standing in the server corridor again, pulling the Ethernet cable from the NVR. A symbolic gesture, killing what he thought was the camera brain. He didn't realize that the recorder was redundant. The footage was already safely duplicated off-site. He gave a satisfied nod, pocketed the cable like a trophy, and left through the same door he'd entered. I sat there for a long time, staring at the frozen frame, Ethan's hand on the handle, that smug little curve at the corner of his mouth. My hands trembled, but not from fear anymore, from something colder. Clarity. By 9 a.m., he was back in the office, the Monday mask polished and perfect. I watched him glide between desks, the charming alpha among mortals. He slapped shoulders, complimented outfits, asked about weekends. The man on camera and the man making coffee were two halves of the same lie. Then his eyes landed on me. "Morning, Alex," he said. "I saw your weekend email draft. Cameras, huh? Appreciate the initiative, but next time, loop me in before reactivating security systems, liability and all that." His tone was syrup over broken glass. He was fishing. He didn't know what I'd seen yet. "Sure," I said. "Didn't think it was a big deal." He smiled. "Everything's a big deal, my friend, especially when it comes to security." He tapped the back of my chair before walking off. My blood went static. He'd read my draft email. That meant he'd gone into my outbox. He was already scrubbing the narrative. At noon, he called an impromptu meeting. "Quick sync," he said, leaning against the glass wall, like a talk show host. Everyone gathered, 15 of us, caffeine-eyed and confused. He started talking about integrity protocols and data management accountability. Then, like it was an afterthought, he said, "Oh, and IT's been tinkering with surveillance again. Not exactly cleared through me first, but I'm sure it was just enthusiasm." A few laughs. Eyes darted toward me. I forced a smile, pretending not to care. Inside, my pulse was counting frames. 213, 219, 307, 329. After the meeting, I slipped into the server room and locked the door behind me. The hum of cooling fans drowned out my breathing. I copied the entire weekend dataset. Encrypted, time-stamped, hashed. I wrote a small script to log any attempt to modify camera configurations, then sent a test ping to confirm that remote backups were syncing hourly. I was building a cage around the truth, one layer at a time. That's when I saw it. Another red flag in the logs. An unscheduled badge entry from the night before. Same time as the footage. Badge ID, Solfront60, mine, my access card. He'd cloned it. The realization landed like a blow. He wasn't improvising. He'd planned to make it look like I was the intruder. The clone badge would trace every door he opened back to me. And with that incident report he printed, HR would have a complete narrative. I turned on the cameras secretly, accessed restricted areas, stole client prototypes, then tried to wipe the evidence. A perfect frame job, clean, digital, and plausible. I felt something shift inside me then. Fear folded into focus. Ethan thought he was the only one writing the story. He didn't know that the cameras were still watching, that I had the footage, the hashes, the audit logs, and now his exact playbook. I shut the console, pocketed my phone, and walked straight past his office. He was on a call, back turned, gesturing toward the window with one hand, his reflection staring right at me in the glass. For a split second our eyes met, his real ones and his mirrored ones, and I wondered if he could feel the trap closing. I stopped by the security office again. Soda was there, same crossword half finished. "You were right," I said. "There was weekend activity." He looked up, slow and measured. Your manager? Yeah, I said. And I think he's planning an encore. Soto folded his crossword and set it aside. Then we'd better make sure the cameras are still rolling. That night, I stayed late to finish reports. Around 10:43, Ethan's calendar pinged. A maintenance block he'd scheduled under my name. System audit, camera adjustments, 11 p.m. He really couldn't resist. I checked every feed twice, every angle, every log. I left my desk exactly as it was that morning. Folder, drawer, everything untouched. Then I added one thing, a decoy USB drive labeled Client Our Data Archive 2024, connected to nothing, just visible enough to tempt him. When the office went dark, I took my laptop and moved to the security booth downstairs where Soto already had the monitors warmed up. One by one, the feeds went to night vision. Black, white, and truth. At 11:02, the elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped out, and this time, we were both watching. There's a certain stillness in a building after hours, a kind of suspended silence where every hum feels amplified, every movement suspicious. Sitting in the glow of the security monitors, I could hear the thud of my heartbeat in my throat. The timestamp in the corner ticked to 11:02:47 p.m., and the elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped out again like he had before. Black jacket, gloves, cap. The same measured stride, the same confidence of a man who thinks he's untouchable. But this time, there was a difference. He hesitated, just for half a second standing under the same dome camera, scanning the hallway. I realized he was making sure no one had learned from his last mistake. He didn't see me watching him from the security booth, 2 floors below, sitting next to a man who had seen more liars than priests. R. Soto, building security. Ex-military, calm as gravity. He leaned forward slightly, hands clasped. That him? He asked quietly. Yeah, I said. That's him. Ethan moved down the hall, stopping briefly at the server room door. His badge, or rather my cloned badge, flashed green. The lock released with a click. The camera above the server corridor captured his silhouette entering the room. I felt the instinct to stand up, to run upstairs to stop him. But Soto's hand landed gently on my arm. Let him hang himself, he murmured. The feed cut to infrared. Ethan's form glowed ghostly white as he approached my desk. He was more methodical this time. He pulled a small flashlight from his pocket and flicked it on, a red beam low to the ground. Military grade, meant to avoid motion sensors. He kneeled by the same drawer he'd planted the USB in the night before. His movements were slower now, precise, rehearsed. He opened the drawer. The camera caught it, the flash of the decoy drive's silver casing, the faint reflection of his own eyes staring at it. He froze for a moment, as if savoring the success, then pulled it out carefully using a handkerchief. He looked around again, pocketed the USB, and stood. But Soto was already switching angles. North hallway 2, he said. Watch the reflection on the window. He was right. The window outside the prototype room caught everything in the glass. Ethan lifting his phone, opening the camera app, taking more photos. Probably proof for the incident report he'd be sending to HR tomorrow morning, the one that would finally catch me. Except this time, we had everything. The cameras, the access logs, the motion sensors, even the air temperature monitors, all syncing automatically to an encrypted cloud bucket I'd renamed Athena Backup. He could rip out every visible wire in the office, and it wouldn't make a difference. At 11:14 p.m., he turned toward the prototype room again. Soto muttered, "There he goes." The lock beeped. The door opened. Inside were the decoy prototypes I'd set up earlier that evening. Empty boxes wrapped in client branding, each sealed with a micro-etched audit sticker that would fluoresce under infrared. He bent down and picked them up. The gloves flexed. The stickers caught the faintest glint of red from the camera's status light. Proof. He zipped the boxes into his backpack, then looked toward the ceiling, directly into the camera, and smirked. That smirk would become evidence exhibit C. Soto exhaled slowly through his nose. You know, he said, people like him always think they're the smartest guy in the room. I didn't look away from the screen. He's not even in the top 10. Ethan wasn't done. At 11:22 p.m., he opened the door to the emergency stairwell, slipping through like a shadow. The garage camera feed popped up automatically, the motion detection we'd calibrated earlier that night. There he was, descending into the parking level. Soto switched to the thermal view. Ethan's heat signature flared faintly behind the glass as he crossed the garage toward the loading dock. Then another shape entered the frame. A man leaning against a gray Civic, hood up, head down, cigarette glowing in the dark. Ethan handed him something. The man looked around, then tossed the cigarette, pocketed the item, and got into the car. The car pulled out of the frame at 11:26 p.m. Soto wrote down the plate number before I even asked. "What's your move now?" he asked. I let him finish, I said. The more rope he takes, the cleaner this ends. He nodded like someone watching a slow fuse burn toward its inevitable flash. The next morning, Ethan strutted into the office like a man about to win. He didn't glance my way, but I could feel the smug radiance pouring off him. Around 9:30, HR sent an email. Urgent, meeting request. Data breach report review, 11 a.m. Sent from Ethan's account. My name was CC'd. By 11, I was sitting across from him in the conference room. He'd already laid out his case. A stack of printed screenshots, access logs, and the incident report he'd so carefully written. His tone was honeyed professionalism. As you can see, he told HR, the unauthorized reactivation of the surveillance system coincided with irregular data exports under Alex's credentials. Furthermore, he flipped to a photo of my desk, the drawer open, the USB inside. We discovered this drive labeled Client Touch Data Archives 2.24 in Alex's possession. When examined, it contained... Nothing, I interrupted. He blinked. Excuse me? Nothing? I repeated calmly. It's empty. You can check. In fact, I pulled out my laptop, connected the drive I'd retrieved from Soto that morning, and opened the directory. A single text file appeared. Evidence log txt. I double-clicked it. The first line filled the projector screen. Timestamp, 11:09 p.m. Subject, Ethan Grady. Device inserted using nitrile gloves. Footage linked to camera feeds. 2, 4, 6, 8. HR went pale. Ethan froze. Smile faltering. I didn't stop there. You said the cameras were off when this was planted. You even cited it in your report. But they weren't off. I clicked another file, a still image of him looking directly into the lens, the reflection of the red recording LED bright in his eyes. This is you, planting it. His jaw tightened. That's photoshopped, fabricated. Soto stepped through the door just then, a thin binder under his arm. Funny thing, he said, voice low, calm. Fabrication timestamps don't usually match our live access logs. He dropped the binder on the table. Inside were printed screenshots from every relevant feed, chain of custody certifications, and a summary signed by building security, the external cloud provider, and me. Ethan's voice cracked as he tried to protest, but HR wasn't looking at him anymore. They were staring at the screen where his own reflection blinked back. You can explain this to legal, Soto said. And the police. They're on their way. Ethan stood, shoulders squared, still trying to recover the arrogance that had carried him this far. This is a witch hunt, he snapped. You think this proves anything? That footage doesn't even show. He stopped when I hit play on the final clip, the one from the garage camera. The gray Civic, the handoff. The license plate zoomed in, the timestamp synchronized with the keycard log under my cloned badge ID. Ethan's face drained of color. The sound of his breath filled the silence. HR spoke first, voice shaking. Ethan, please step outside. He turned to me, eyes cold. You set me up, he whispered. No, I said quietly. You did that yourself. He left without another word. When the door closed, I exhaled for the first time in hours. Soto handed me the binder. "Keep a copy," he said. "You earned it." Outside, through the glass wall, I watched Ethan walk toward the elevators, flanked by 2 security guards. He didn't look back. Maybe he knew the cameras were still watching. That afternoon, the office buzzed with whispers. HR called it a breach of trust. I called it karma. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over yet. There were still unanswered questions about the Civic, the man in the hoodie, and what exactly Ethan had been selling. And I was going to find out, because sometimes the only way to finish a story is to follow it into the dark. If guilt had a sound, it would be the quiet that follows a door closing. That's what filled the office after Ethan's escorted exit. It wasn't relief, not yet. It was the hush of a building holding its breath. Computers humming, vents sighing, people pretending to work, while refreshing Slack threads that whispered his name like superstition. But I wasn't finished. Ethan hadn't acted alone. That much was obvious. The man in the gray Civic hadn't been some random buyer. There was planning, coordination, a network. And buried somewhere in that exchange was the real reason Ethan risked everything. So I went hunting. Soto and I met that night again in the booth, the same low amber glow from the monitors flickering across his face. He brought 2 coffees and something heavier, a quiet respect. "You sure you want to keep digging?" he asked. "You already buried him clean." "I don't like loose ends," I said. "He had a buyer. That means that there's a trail." He slid a notepad toward me. "Garage plate's been flagged. Registered to a logistics company out in Newark, Shell Corporation. But the car was rented under a different name. Want to guess who signed the authorization?" "Ethan?" He shook his head. "Someone in your building. Someone with higher clearance than both of you." That was when the picture started to shift. Ethan wasn't the architect. He was the mule. I pulled up internal correspondence archives. Hidden in the metadata of one of Ethan's performance reports was an image attachment, a scanned signature from our finance director, Maren Ellsworth. I'd seen her maybe twice in person. Polished, poised, always smelled like cardamom and upper management. She controlled the accounts, and she had final approval on prototype shipping manifests. I knew what came next. The real trap wasn't catching Ethan. It was seeing who came to clean up after him. The following night, the office slept again except for 2 people, me and Soto. We'd reconfigured the motion alerts, installed a new silent tripwire across the prototype room's lock, and hidden a micro camera above the server corridor's vent. A blind spot even Ethan never knew existed. The bait was simple. A fake invoice buried in our document server, time-stamped as retrieved from Ethan's deleted folders. The file name looked innocuous. Client, Payment, Adjustment, XLS. Inside was a silent beacon that would ping us the moment anyone opened it remotely. If Maren or anyone in finance accessed it, we'd see it. At 10:47 p.m., the alert hit. "Finance VPN, session active." Soto leaned closer. "She's in." A few seconds later, the north hallway camera came alive. He frowned. "That's not her." On screen, a tall man in a black jacket, cap low, same gloves. Not Ethan. Someone else. He moved with military precision. No hesitation, no fumbling. He went straight to the prototype room, used a master key card, and opened the door in one smooth motion. He didn't steal. He replaced. Out came a new USB. In went the old one. Quick, practiced, efficient. The stickered boxes stayed untouched, but the USB, the one Ethan had originally stolen, changed hands again. Soto's voice was a low growl. "Professional." "He's cleaning the mess," I said. The man turned toward the door, looked up once, and for a heartbeat the camera caught his face. I froze. He wasn't from our company. He was corporate security. I recognized the patch on his jacket. Ellsworth Solutions, Private Investigations. Maren's side firm. The same company that handled all of finance's discreet audits. This wasn't cleanup. It was cover-up. At 11:10 p.m., Soto and I were already moving. We left the booth and took the stairs 2 at a time. The office smelled like disinfectant and ozone. We didn't turn on lights. The night vision feeds on our phones guided every step. We caught him at the far end of the hallway, kneeling by the server rack, slotting the fake USB into a port. "Evening," Soto said, voice steady, gunmetal calm. "That company ID you're wearing's expired." The man froze, then without turning said, "Building maintenance authorization. You don't want to interfere." "I am building maintenance," Soto replied. The man straightened, slow and deliberate. His hands went up, palms outward. "Orders from upstairs," he said. "Director Ellsworth requested retrieval of compromised material. Chain of custody transfer." I stepped closer, careful. "You mean evidence tampering?" He glanced at me then, a flick of the eyes, cold and professional. "You're the tech, the one she mentioned." It wasn't a question. "What did she tell you?" I asked. "That you planted evidence to frame a colleague, that we're containing fallout before the board gets wind." Soto's jaw tightened. "Contain this." He reached into his pocket, produced a small metallic tag, and pressed it against the rack. A faint chirp. The hidden air tag in the USB drive activated. The man's expression flickered. "What's that?" "Insurance," I said. We stepped aside, letting him leave. He backed toward the exit, hands up, mask slipping into irritation. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. "You have no idea who's actually running this." He was right, but now at least I knew where to look. The next morning, the company buzzed with confusion. HR was in full lockdown mode. Ethan's suspension had turned into a formal termination, but quietly, legal had ordered everyone to stop discussing the incident. Marin wasn't in her office. No one had seen her since late last night. At 9:30, my inbox pinged with an email marked "Confidential. Internal Inquiry." It was from the board liaison. Subject: Meeting Request. Project Integrity Audit. The meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. Soto texted me one line. "She's moving faster than we thought." He was right. By noon, every finance directory had been wiped clean. Backup archives for the prototype department were suddenly inaccessible due to compliance updates, and yet the AirTag was still pinging, moving steadily toward the east side of the city. At 2:58 p.m., the boardroom was colder than usual. 3 executives sat at one end of the long table. I was at the other. Marin walked in late, calm, collected, wearing a gray suit and that faint cardamom scent. "Mr. Reyes," she began. She always used last names, never first. "We appreciate your diligence regarding last week's events. Unfortunately, certain procedural missteps have compromised your position." There it was, the setup. Ethan 2.0, bigger stage, cleaner script. She slid a printed document across the table. "Effective immediately, you're suspended pending investigation into unauthorized surveillance practices and data manipulation." I didn't touch the paper. "You mean catching your accomplice," I said. Her smile was professional, brittle. "I have no idea what you're referring to." I opened my laptop, plugged in the drive, projected the screen onto the wall. The footage rolled, the maintenance contractor entering at 10:47 p.m., replacing the USB, slotting it into the rack. Marin's logo visible on his jacket sleeve. The timestamp synced with access logs from her account. Her face didn't move, but her eyes did. Tiny shift, a blink too slow. One of the board members leaned forward. "Director Ellsworth, that's your private security division's insignia." "That's not possible," she said. "This footage could be manipulated," I asked, "like the files you tried to erase." I clicked again. A second window opened. The AirTag tracking dashboard. The signal pulsed live, its location blinking 3 miles east, in the exact coordinates of Ellsworth Solutions headquarters. The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was the sound of a verdict forming in real time. The chair of the board turned to her. "Marin, we'll need you to step outside." She stood, smoothed her jacket, and looked directly at me. There was no rage, no panic, just a faint, resigned curiosity. "You're smarter than you look, Mr. Reyes. I held her gaze. You should have checked who installed your cameras. She left without another word. By 5 p.m., security escorted her out of the building, the same path Ethan had taken 2 days earlier. HR sent a company-wide notice 30 minutes later. Director of Finance Maren Ellsworth has resigned effective immediately. An interim review board will oversee all pending investigations. That night, I sat in my cubicle staring at the glow of the monitors. The office was quiet again, too quiet. Soto appeared at my door holding 2 mugs. You done yet? He asked. Not even close, I said. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about exposure. He handed me one of the mugs. You already exposed them. What's left? I looked at the red dot blinking faintly on my monitor, the camera's heartbeat. Now, I said, we make sure they can't hide in the dark again. And somewhere in the city, a tiny tracker kept pulsing. The proof that the truth, once recorded, doesn't die. It just waits. By Tuesday morning, the building didn't feel like my workplace anymore. It felt like a courtroom wrapped in drywall. Everyone moved softer, voices hushed, as if the carpet itself was listening. HR had cordoned off the boardroom and turned it into a fact-finding center. Legal was on site. Uniformed police officers lingered by the elevators like punctuation marks. When my phone buzzed at 9:05 a.m., with a calendar invite titled Integrity Hearing, attendance required, my hands didn't shake. They were steady now. The evidence was airtight. The trap had already sprung. I walked in carrying only a thin binder and my laptop. The room smelled of brewed coffee and fresh toner. At the long table, 2 HR leads, a corporate attorney, an external auditor, and Captain Lee from the city's white-collar crimes division. At the far end sat Ethan, pale but still in his tailored jacket, flanked by a union rep. His eyes flicked to me in a way like he was checking if a nightmare had followed him out of sleep. The HR director cleared her throat. We're here to review serious allegations regarding theft of client prototypes, unauthorized surveillance, and falsification of security logs. We'll hear statements and then review material evidence. Ethan spoke first, his voice still holding a shred of swagger. This entire situation is a frame job. Alex here activated cameras without authorization, manipulated footage, and planted devices to incriminate me. He even— Stop, said Captain Lee. He set a USB stick on the table. We're going to go through this chronologically. He plugged the drive into the projector. The first clip appeared on the wall. Ethan, 2:13 a.m., walking out of the elevator in nitrile gloves, baseball cap low, the green flash of a clone badge. He moved down the hall and into the prototype room, exactly as I'd seen. The timestamp pulsed in the corner. Chain of custody watermarks overlaid the bottom. That's doctored, Ethan snapped. You can't prove? Lee clicked again. The screen split into 4 feeds, all synced. North hallway, server corridor, accounting printer, garage cam. Ethan planting the USB, printing the incident report, handing off the package in the parking garage to the gray Civic, the manila folder on my chair, the smug rehearsal in the elevator mirror. The external auditor spoke for the first time. Mr. Grady, you're asserting this footage is fabricated? Yes, Ethan said. Absolutely. The auditor tapped a printed sheet. These are the vendor hashes from the cloud provider. Each clip is verified by independent third-party time servers. They can't be altered retroactively without invalidating the signature. In other words, these are originals. Ethan's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. I opened my binder and slid a paper across the table. A single-page timeline mapping badge logs to camera footage, printer spools, and email metadata. This, I said, is your night in our system. Not mine. Lee didn't give him time to regroup. We also have the AirTag signal embedded in the decoy USB, he said, opening a live map on the screen. A pulsing blue dot blinked at Ellsworth Solutions headquarters. It left this building in your possession and arrived at the same private security firm whose contractor we caught on camera, attempting to retrieve it last night. The color drained from Ethan's face. That's not what it looks like, he whispered. HR leaned forward. Then explain what it is. Silence. I didn't gloat. I just watched him struggle, the way you watch a man realize gravity applies to him too. For months he'd been constructing a story where I was the villain, the careless tech who'd stolen, who'd botched security, who'd needed to be managed out. And in one night, the cameras had rewritten his story in real time. Enough, said the corporate attorney. Effective immediately, Mr. Grady, your access credentials are revoked. Security will escort you from the premises. Due to the seriousness of the allegations, law enforcement will take custody from here. Lee stood and nodded to the two officers waiting by the door. Ethan's chair scraped as he rose, his rep whispering urgently in his ear. For the first time since I'd known him, Ethan didn't look angry. He looked small. He glanced at me. A flicker of something. Maybe regret, maybe calculation, and then looked away. As the officers let him out, the HR director turned to me. Mr. Reyes, thank you for your cooperation. We'll be conducting a full review of security protocols. We'd also like to discuss a formal role for you in risk management. I closed my binder. We can talk later, I said. I have one more thing to finish first. 2 hours later, I walked through the office. People avoided my eyes at first, then began to nod, small acknowledgments like passing lanterns. In the break room, the janitor, the same one Ethan had bullied, was restocking paper towels. He straightened when he saw me. I heard, he said quietly. They told me I'm reinstated. Back pay too. I smiled. You deserve more than that. He shook my hand, calloused and warm. You saved my job, he said. No, I replied. You just finally had someone watching. That evening, alone in my cubicle, I opened the footage one last time. The 2:13 a.m. clip. Ethan stepping out of the elevator, unaware the system was alive again, the red LED reflected in his pupils like a tiny star. I paused the frame and sat back. Revenge wasn't supposed to feel like this. It wasn't a rush or a victory lap. It was a quiet exhale. The system had worked. The truth had held. And the people who thought they could write their own reality had learned that some stories record themselves. I closed the player, encrypted the evidence packet, and dropped it into a secure archive. My inbox pinged, a message from the CEO requesting a meeting to discuss your future at the company. For the first time in weeks, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. But the story wasn't quite over. Ellsworth Solutions still had the decoy USB. The AirTag was still pulsing in their headquarters, and Marin Ellsworth herself hadn't yet been called to account. That would come next. 2 weeks later, the air in the building finally felt breathable again. The tension that had hummed through every hallway, every cubicle, had drained out like stale air through a vent. HR was still auditing files. Legal was still talking about compliance restructuring. But for the first time in months, people were smiling again. They joked at the coffee machine. They stayed a little later because they wanted to, not because they were afraid. Ethan was gone. Marin Ellsworth was gone. But their ghosts lingered, in policy memos, locked drives, and whispers that faded when I entered a room. I didn't need to hear them. I'd seen the footage. I'd seen everything. The official report called it Operation Reclamation. The board wanted it buried under that name. Sterile, forgettable, corporate. But I'll tell you what it really was. A cleanup of the mess they pretended not to see until it became a headline risk. Ethan was charged with theft, evidence tampering, and falsification of security records. He confessed within 48 hours. In exchange for leniency, he gave up everything. The fake accounts, the messages between him and Ellsworth, even the payment trail from the gray Civic's buyer. He said one thing that stuck with me. She told me it had just looked like a small breach, he said. She said nobody ever checks the footage. He was right, until I did. Marin didn't go quietly. The morning after Ethan's arrest, she tried to move $500,000 out of the company's R&D escrow account. She called it damage mitigation. The transfer bounced. The compliance firewall had already been triggered by the audit. When officers showed up at her firm's office, she was still in her gray suit, sipping coffee, calm as ever. She didn't even resist. "I knew this would happen," she told them. "You people always think you're heroes when you're just the janitors cleaning up after us." For once, I didn't disagree. Heroes get parades, janitors get peace. I preferred peace. A week after it was over, the CEO called me into his office. Not the temporary one they'd set up during the investigation, but his real corner space, all glass and quiet. He stood as I entered. "Alex," he said, "I don't think I've ever seen anyone handle something like that with as much control as you did." "I was just doing my job," I said. It wasn't humility. It was the truth. My job was to watch, to notice what others didn't. He gestured to a folder on the desk. "We'd like to make that official. Head of Security Operations, Budget, Staff, your own department. You'd oversee every digital and physical monitoring protocol." For a moment, I didn't speak. I thought of the quiet nights in the booth, the blue glow of the screens, Soto's patient voice saying, "Let him hang himself." "Do I get to pick my team?" I asked. He smiled. "That's the idea." I took the job. The first hire I made was Soto. He didn't even hesitate. "You need a man who reads faces better than firewalls," he said. "I'm in." We built something solid. Transparent logs, dual access controls, encrypted offsite redundancies. Every feed had 2 custodians. Every deletion required 2 keys. And every employee knew that the cameras didn't exist to watch them. They existed to protect them. That was the irony, really. Cameras don't prevent bad things from happening. They just tell the truth afterward. But sometimes, that's enough. Late one Friday, long after the office emptied, I walked the halls alone. I passed the prototype room, the padlock replaced, new camera mounted directly above it, its red LED blinking faintly in the dark. I stopped just to listen. The hum of electricity, the soft throb of data through fiber, the rhythm of a system alive and awake. It sounded almost like breathing. In the server corridor, I found the spot where Ethan had stood that first night, the dead DVR still on the shelf, disconnected, a relic. I remembered the way he'd smiled at it, certain he'd killed the evidence. He'd never realized that sometimes the smallest things, a new wire, a quiet system, a single red light, can change everything. I unlocked the control panel and brought up the archive. The footage list scrolled down, weeks of entries. I hovered over one file. Cam reception, JUS 213 sequence, ISO1.mp4. I hesitated. Then I opened it. There he was, Ethan stepping out of the elevator, unaware of the eyes watching him. The stillness, the precision, the arrogance. I let the clip play to the moment he looked up, just before he turned toward the glass doors. Pause. Frame forward. There. The faint reflection in his pupils. The red recording light. That single tiny heartbeat of truth. The exact moment he lost control of his own story. I watched it once. Then again. Slower. My pulse matched the rhythm of that blinking LED. When I finally closed the window, I exported one frame, just that one, and encrypted it under a simple name. Record JPG. That was the only clip I kept. Not out of spite, out of memory. To remind myself that justice isn't loud. It's patient. It watches. It waits. And when the light finally comes on, it doesn't need to shout. Weeks later, as I left the office for the night, I caught sight of my reflection in the elevator mirror. Tired eyes, soft grin, the faint pulse of a red LED above the door. For a heartbeat, I looked straight into it and smiled. This time the camera blinked back.